Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another webinar series hosted by the Washington Kurdish Institute, the WKI. My name is Yousif Ismael. I'm the director of the WKI, and today I have the privilege and honor to host a group of Kurdish experts speaking about an important topic, and that is the 2021 events in the Kurdistan, in the Greater Kurdistan, including each region separately, and then what to look forward to in 2022 and beyond. Our distinguished speakers will be proposing policies mainly to the United States and how to approach the issues that are facing the Kurdish nation. I am very happy to have Dr. Yerevan Saeed, Dr. Deniz with us, Mr. Arash Saleh, and Dr. Azad Deewanee from London joining us. And I look forward to a fruitful, constructive discussion. And I'm taking advantage of the time, so I'm just gonna give the floor to our speakers, and you can find their bios and accomplishments at our website, that's dckurd.org. Without further ado, to talk about Northern Kurdistan or the Kurdistan region of Turkey, I give the floor to Dr. Deniz. Dr. Deniz.
Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to start actually a couple of problems that are happening right now in Turkey, political and economic problems. And probably most of you are aware that inflation is so high, and dollar has increased 18.4 last month, which is one of the highest in history probably. And Turkish lira is 46% weaker than last year. And because economically people are not doing well, especially working class and lower middle class is doing terrible. Whoever I talk to, they complain. They complain everything is being so expensive. And especially as we can think of, Kurdish region, most of these people were middle class or working class or lower class, and so they got poor over last couple of months. They got even more poor. So the politically, as you can imagine, people are not happy, and they don't want any more AKP party. And there has been a coalition against AKP party, which is about 6 or 7 political Turkish parties, and they want to have their own, have an individual that will, for the next election, which will take place in 2013, in mid-2023, and so they are hoping that they will be able to kick out the AKP party in the parliament. And I've done some research to see, what people are thinking. And I find some pollings that shows, talks about, the parties and how they think. And the first polling that I found that people believe in opposition parties better than AKP party. Especially they think that the opposition party will be able to do better economically. And polling also shows that approval rating for the Erdogan, one of the lowest since 2015, which is about 38 to 33%. And he used to get approval over 50%. And the main opposition party, Republican People's Party, and had a 23% support. And pro-Kurdish party, HDP party, has 9.4%. And usually that's what they usually get anyhow. And the polling also shows that, more people, at least most of people, believes that even the government has taken some measures to improve the economy. It's not going to work out. Things are not going to get better. So what's this opposition parties about? And as I mentioned, these are about 6 to 7 political parties, and pro-Kurdish party is also talking to them. and trying to, find a good candidate for the presidential election. And the focus on this opposition parties there are some shared principles they have, like justice. Justice has been denied last 10 years, maybe, okay? And media is not anymore have freedom, academic, people are not able to talk or do research on certain things. And law has been discriminated against certain individuals. So they also wants to return to parliamentarian system, which has changed a few years ago. So while these things are happening, what happens to Kurds? What's Kurds are doing? Kurds are still being targeted. And recently, May 2021, in Konya, which is the central city, it's not a Kurdish city, mostly heavily Turkish people lives in that city. 7 members of a Kurdish family were killed by a group of about 60 Turkish nationalists because they thought, they have no right to live in Konya. They want to get rid of them. So, and people believe that those, discrimination, killings, and hate crimes are due to, the source is the state. State is supporting this kind of acts. So, and not just the individuals, there are also HDP party, pro-Kurdish party members has been under immense pressure. Many HDP executives and elected officials has been charged with terrorism. Many mayors lost their jobs. And their jobs is, they just fire them literally. And those are elected officials, by the way. So just recently, meaning yesterday, Erdogan stated, we don't want to see extension of the PKK terrorist group in the Turkish parliament. So there's a growing call for Turkish political leaders for the HDP party to be officially closed down. So probably next step is to close down. But again, most of those individuals, Kurdish officials, are already in prison, and they are supporters as well. So this is what happens in Turkey. So in general, but Turkey also has a lot of involves in Syria and in Iraq. So I like to also talk briefly about those issues that they have. Turkey uses chemical weapons against fighters of the PKK in Kurdish regional government last 6 months and before even. And this is a violation of Chemical Weapon Convention. Turkey signed this convention in 1997. So, and they are not just using those weapons against PKK members, also many Iraqi Kurdish civilians lost their lives. And I don't have the exact numbers, but it's about over 40 people. And still bombing continues in Kobani and other Kurdish cities in northern Syria. Turkey, time to time, cutting off the water to these areas where Kurds lives. And the goal is Turkey is trying to ethnically cleanse Kurds, Christians, and others in northern Syria, then replace them with the Arab Syrians. And as you can imagine, bombing creates a lot of instability, fear, frustration among Kurds and others. And this violation wasn't done against just Kurdish fighters, but the civilians were also targeted, or they didn't care if that was a civilian or not. And Turkey is using former Syrian radical rebels to fight against Kurds in Syria and others. Time to time, Russia stepped up and used airstrikes against Turkey to stop their expansion in northern Syria. And Russia and Turkey also tried to pressure Kurdish people, Kurdish organization in Syria to talk to Damascus as we know, Damascus is not interested in, or Assad is not interested in talking to Kurds or giving them any rights. So when we talk about Middle East, we have to talk about United States. So as we know, during Trump administration, things has changed dramatically, and the Trump administration ignored Turkey's invasion of Afrin in 2018. And during that invasion and ethnic cleansing of more than 160,000 Kurds, Christians or others had to leave their homes. And the Trump administration also didn't ignored Turkey's attack to SDF forces. But things has changed since Biden has taken the office, and he has done a couple of things that I think is essential to Kurds. One thing that he focuses on right now is Kurdish unity, which is very, very important. And he also appointed some of those leaderships, like Brett McGurk. He's an ally, he's a good friend with the Kurds, and he's back to work in the Middle East and working with the Kurdish organizations. So why Kurdish unity is not easy? Couple of things. And time to time, I talk that in my book, but Kurds collaborated against ISIS, but there has been some fighting against these Kurdish organizations, not in general, right? We get along I think pretty well as individuals. But organizations are having some issues with each other, either political or others. And recently, Kurdish regional government closed the borders to the Syria, and which harms the humanitarian operation in northern Syria. According to UN, this humanitarian aid assists 1.8 million people. So this is essential. I'm not sure why they have been closing the border. Again, political issue is one thing, but this is not a good way of resolving the issues, obviously. And also, fighting against Kurdish organization weakens Kurdish positions, and they have gained a lot of power. Now they are harming that by fighting against one another. And US wants to support SDF right now, at least, and continue to fight against ISIS and stabilize the region. But at some point they want to leave, like they left Afghanistan and Iraq, or they are still in Iraq, but not officially, or not like that. But so it seems like right now, politically, what they are doing, it's beneficial for both parties, meaning for the United States and for Kurds. Uniting them, it's really essential for us. And supporting them is one thing too. But as we know, if Biden administration doesn't win the next election, we don't know what happens to the Kurds, right? There's unknowns always. And Kurds has been loyal and reliable allies all these years. And leaving them out or just not supporting them and saying, I'm sorry, Turkey is my friend. I cannot support you because they are angry or frustrated with our relationship. They have to kind of find a balance somehow. I don't know how, but they have to find that. They have to say, I cannot leave them out. This is my friendship. As we know, Turkey not has been a good friend to United States, not all the time, at least. And time to time, they turned their back to United States when they invaded Iraq. They didn't allow U.S. government to use the Turkish land for the military operations and all that. And so I think United States shouldn't forget about their friends, and they should just, be loyal to the Kurds as well. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the listening.
Thank you, Dr. Deniz. We will come back with questions, and I want to tell the audience that please, your engagement is essential. So feel free to post a question or raise your hand. We will enable your audio during Q&A. To talk about Iraqi Kurdistan or Bashur, Dr. Yerevan, Saeed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kagis. It's really an honor to be here. I will start about the main events that happened in Iraqi Kurdistan and how they have reflected or impacted the Kurdish region, the Kurdish society in region. I think there were a number of events that mounted pressure on the Kurdistan region, in my view, to the breaking point. And I'll start with the security ones. The security event is, as Dr. Deniz talked about, is one of them with the Turkish military incursion into the Kurdistan region. We saw that, especially last year, it penetrated deeply into the Kurdistan region. In Erbil province, in Dohak province, they have set up multiple bases, both military and also intelligence, in the Kurdistan region. That has led to the destructions of dozens of Kurdish villages, and thousands of Kurdish villages have been displaced. In addition to that, we had the multiple attacks by the Shia militia forces on Erbil International Airport. And these attacks, of course, had minimal death tolls, but certainly they created lots of dismay, concerns among the Kurdish people. And they were meant to plant the seed of uncertainty and instability in the Kurdistan region for the business community and for the foreign investors as well. We also saw an uptick of the ISIS attacks on the Kurdish front lines, on the Peshmerga forces, which led to wounding and killing dozens of members of the Peshmerga forces. I think what is troubling is the Iraqi forces allow ISIS to operate freely in the disputed areas. There is like a buffer zone between the Kurdish forces and the Iraqi forces. That's where ISIS is obviously conducting regrouping, training, and also recruiting people to launch these attacks on the Kurdish front lines. You see that the Iraqi forces and the Shia militia forces do nothing to stop these attacks. I don't know if this is not a deliberate policy approach by Baghdad. Really, what are you going to call this? Especially when you see Baghdad is reluctant to allow Kurdish forces to provide security in this buffer zone. Not just that, even is refusing to set up a joint military mechanism, which was in place since 2003 to 2014, where the Kurdish and the Iraqi forces were jointly providing security forces in the disputed areas. To this issue, the Arabization, which is a really major issue. I know it doesn't track international headline, but there is really a systematic approach by the Iraqi government or Shia militia forces in the disputed area, especially in Kirkuk, to seize Kurdish land and properties. I think that's where ISIS fails to cause problem for the Kurds. The Iraqi security forces support the Arab settlers to do that, and this has manifested itself several times in Deniz area and also in Palakana village. So we can see the Kurdistan region in 2021 really territorially sandwiched by Turkey in the north and to some extent in the east, and also by the Shia militia forces and ISIS in the south and the west. So in general, one can argue there is a systematic and incremental effort by these powers or by these forces to chip away land from the Kurds as much as possible. On the local level, you have deep partisan fissures and divisions between the KDP and PUK, and within the PUK, you had that white coup, which led to the complete collapse of the structure of the PUK, where one co-president, which was Pavel Talabani, and his brother Hobad, marginalized Lahor Sharjangi, who was the other co-president of the PUK. And these problems and divisions had negative reflections and negative impacts on the economy, on the rule of law, on the trust of the people in the government as well. The state of the economy is suffering. It's suffering because of the lack of trust between the KDP and the PUK. They have held people hostage to either advance their partisan political agenda or out of sheer of personal animosity. KRG does not have money to pay on time to the civil servant, and mostly because the ruling parties really control the economy and refuse to hand over the internal revenues to the KRG treasury. Let me just be very, very clear. The Kurdistan region does not have a money problem. It has a problem of lacking of a central authority to collect internal revenues. So as a result, on one hand, there's a huge vertical inequality between common people and those who are close to the peak of power. On the other hand, you have horizontal inequality in the Kurdistan region, which is the inequality between different cities and areas in the Kurdistan region. And of course, the issue of corruption, which is an endemic in the Kurdistan region, only enhances these inequalities. This has resulted in sporadic protests in the Kurdistan region, especially in the areas where people feel the economic injustice most, which is the PUK area. Although these protests, of course, did not threaten the system, but it is an indication of grave dissatisfaction with the government and the political parties. So these internal and external factors, in my view, have led to socio-political uncertainty about the future of Kurdistan, thereby acute disappointment and pessimism among the Kurds, as evidenced by the recent waves of migrations to Europe, which dominated the international headline. And I think it was a big hit to the reputation of the KRG. So we really stepped into the 2022 with these issues and the grievances, and to what extent we're going to see the iterations of these issues or their improvement will really depend on how assertive the KRG is in extending its authority of the Kurdistan region, providing a grand vision and planning to manage these issues. But also how the Iraqi government, the new Iraqi government, which is in process of formation, will deal with the Kurdistan region. We saw the Sadrs were the main victors, and we will see how they are going to act in the term of dealing with the Kurdistan region, in the term of finance, as well as whether they will be able to unleash some of these militia forces that Sadr has promised to put a hold on their destabilizing behaviors in Iraq. But one more thing I want to point out is, in post 2017, until 2017, you had a vision, or at least something people were saying, a goal. People were saying, okay, we're going towards the Kurdish statehood. After the September of 2017, which the referendum did not work as it was supposed to be, there was a collapse of trust about the future in the Kurdistan region. People cannot identify themselves with a vision. You know, the Kurdity and the Kurdish state, Kurdish nationalism was the magnet that attracted many, many people. They had hope in the future of the region. But since 2017, there is a lack of a grand vision that can guide the Kurdish people and the Kurdish leadership. I think if it were to the KRG to find some some solutions in terms of, gaining the trust of the people. Of course, effective governance is very, very important. Being able to provide a minimal service, as well as providing this grand vision so that people will have a stake in future of the Kurdistan region. In the term of, I don't know whether I should leave the policy recommendation for the US for the later, or I can do it right now. Yousif, what do you think?
You could go ahead and do it.
Okay. And also, one thing that when the Biden administration came to power, they put out an interim strategic, foreign policy guideline. And the core of this guideline was the issue of the human rights, it's freedom of expression, democracy. And unfortunately, the Kurdistan region has not fared well in 2021 when it comes to this, as we saw with the issue of the trial of the Badinan activist, suppressions of freedom of expression in the Kurdistan region. If the KRG wants to really identify and try to connect it with the United States and with the policymakers in Washington, D.C., it has to really pay attention to these issues as well. In addition, the Biden administration has also voted, and they put out a very ambitious strategic plan about how to tackle corruption, not just in the United States, but in the world as well. That's another area where the Kurdistan region really should and must try to take care of the issue of the corruption in the Kurdistan region, which is really a major issue. And also, Dr. Deniz talked about the border closure between Rojava and the Kurdistan region. Yeah, true. It is closed. There are lots of issues between the KRG and Rojava ideologically, as well as politically. But I think to a very good extent, the U.S. mediation and efforts have put a lid on the differences, at least not in a way that they would get out of control. The United States understand that the KRG is essential for its logistical support for Rojava, for its military operations and presence there. Therefore, it has lots of interest and stakes in keeping these issues tempered down as much as possible. So I'll just stop there, and we'll keep the rest for.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Yerevan. Very useful information. We'll come back with questions, of course. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Arash Saleh, the representative of the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan, to speak about Rojhelat or Iranian Kurdistan. Please.
Thank you so much, Yousif. Let me please first start by thanking WKI for such a timely webinar. Well, I'm going to structure my discussion around two main pivots. For the first part, I'm going to give you a brief report on major events and share with you some statistics that reveals the depth of systematic human rights abuses in Rojhelat. For the second part of my discussion, I will argue about some measures that the United States can take to use the Kurdish factor at its full capacity as one of the tools in its regional and foreign relations policy toolkit. Let me start with describing the depth of oppression that is going on against Kurds in Iran, using both numbers and also analysis of the hidden mechanisms of what we call ethnic domination in Iran. I'm going to start with statistics. I gathered the statistics from various human rights organizations such as KORTPA and Hengav. I also checked parts of this information and numbers with reports from other non-Kurdish Iranian organizations who report on human rights situation in Iran, like Herana. Well, in 2021, Iranian regime executed at least 48 Kurdish citizens. Among them was the famous case of Haydar Qurbani. I'm sure that you've heard of him a lot. He was a political prisoner who got executed at the end of the year. Qurbani's case specifically has analytical significance for understanding the actual relationship between different branches of the government in Iran. It also sheds more light on the real locus of power in the whole structure of the regime. He was executed despite the fact that even the higher court in Iran annulled the conviction. Well, even the higher court actually, when annulled the conviction, they cited that there was lack of evidence for this conviction in the lower court. But you know, amazingly, the security apparatus of the regime, or to be more specific, the deep states organization in Kurdistan, including, you know, IRGC, representative of the leader in the province, and the intelligence ministry, insisted on execution and carried it out in a very secretive manner, without, you know, letting his family, or without actually his family or lawyer being notified. So during this year, more than 550 Kurdish citizens got arrested. Human rights organization actually believe that the actual number is higher, because their estimation is that you know, there are more than 100 cases that have not been publicized, and we don't know anything about them. The majority of them have been accused because of their political activities, and have been charged with membership or partisanship of Kurdish political parties. These detainees face various types of systematic tortures and violations. As a result of this situation, I can say 18 prisoners died in jail in 2021. And they all died in majority of them died in a very cloudy and suspicious circumstances. More than 235 Kurdish citizens have been directly shot at by the police by the border patrol agency, and by IRGC. 65 of them basically lost their lives. When I'm talking about this number, it doesn't include the victims of landmines that have been planted there by the regime. Landmines injured 28 and killed 18 people. The systematic attack on Kurdish culture also has continued more severely during this year. These attacks are part of the strategies to continue what we call the ethnic domination in Iran. The ethnic domination is entrenched in formal discourse, and actually act through derision, ridiculing, and belittling of Kurdish culture in mass media, in public culture, in pop culture, in bureaucracy, and even in, you know, reproduction of knowledge in the country. From the other side also, the security apparatus also continues to attack, you know, those who are trying to somehow help this culture, or you know, promote the Kurdish culture. For example, in one case, you're all familiar with the case of Zara. Well, Zara actually, Zara Muhammadi, who was a Kurdish language teacher, was sentenced for 5 years imprisonment during 2021. In another, there's another instance that is not very well known for public. It's the case of Keyvan Minui, another Kurdish language teacher, who was arrested in November 2021, and there hasn't been any contacts to lawyers or the family so far. So we have no idea in what situation he is right now. During 2021, the Iranian regime continued shelling and bombarding the positions of Iranian Kurdish political parties. In September, the IRGC attacked the borders of KRG with the pretext of presence of paid PDK Peshmerga forces. They mainly targeted civilian people and livestock of the KRG citizens. Even one PDK Peshmerga did not, you know, wasn't wounded there. So it says us that there weren't any Peshmerga there. If there was, probably one of them should have been, for example, wounded. With the arrival of spring, the area, you know, in Iranian Kurdistan, so it's like in April and May, the presence of Kurdish Peshmerga forces in towns and villages inside the Iranian Kurdistan actually increased during past year. For example, in 2 cases, footages of Peshmerga forces in Bane, which is deep in the borders of Iranian Kurdistan, and also in Oshnavi, another city, or Shino, another city in in West Azerbaijan, which is deep inside Iranian Kurdistan. Basically, the footages of presence of this Peshmerga went viral on social media. The main, from the other side, from the Kurdish political society side, if we can actually put some focus on them, the Kurdish political parties took some step to get more closer, at least the main Kurdish political parties, and to ramp up some sort of cooperation that they have already started. You already know that the major parties have formed an umbrella organization among themselves called Center for Cooperation. They started discussing taking this cooperation to a different level by including military and foreign relation issues in the agenda of the center, and somehow create some foundations for effective coordination between the parties in both of these realms. The regime signals from the other side for militarization of Iranian Kurdistan by appointing governors with heavy military and security backgrounds for the four main Kurdish political provinces. From the economic side of the issues, the depreciation of money, the Iranian currency, corruption, and this kind of stuff actually faced people with unprecedented hardship, and quite astonishingly, the situation always finds some room to get worse. So the moment you believe that the economy is at the the rock bottom, you realize that it still can go even more down. The fact that Iran is formed in a way that Kurdistan has always been a periphery exacerbates the negative effects of economic situation in Iran. I'm saying in Kurdistan. Well, that has led to unprecedented numbers of suicide, specifically among youth in Iranian Kurdistan. The economic pressures, the social pressure, the political pressure, all this multidimensional pressures on Kurdish society in Iran actually has led to a huge number of suicides among youth in Iranian Kurdistan. As for the United States, I believe it is imperative for the United States to understand that there is still room for the Kurdish factor to play in favor of US interests in the region. And even it can play a significant role in global conflict between democracy and authoritarianism. To be able to fully utilize these capacities, the United States needs some infrastructures, I believe. With the current situation, with the current approach, it's hard to get the United States to that point. It is important for the United States to realize that, with the previous approach, with the conventional approach of making states the center of the policy, they cannot get to that point that can utilize the capacities of communities in the region, especially Kurds, in favor of their interests, in favor of their global challenges. That we live in a world that non-state actors are basically getting more important. Communities are becoming more important in the Middle East. And you already know that how, for example, Kurdish communities around, inside the Middle East has helped the main agendas of the American various administrations to be carried out there more, suitably. So I would suggest two things for the United States to do. First, it is important for the United States to have a special envoy in Kurdish issues. There are more than 40 million Kurds in the region. They have reached a higher level of, national awareness, and they are playing a significant role. And it is important for the United States to have a special envoy in that regard, to be able to actually build these infrastructures and these foundations that are required for, its policies in the region. And the United States has already, experienced how track 2 diplomacy helps its diplomatic apparatus to, face global challenges. I believe, expanding this kind of diplomacy in the Kurdish political society in the region will have the same effect, especially, not only, the effect of, empowering the Kurdish society to be able to play a significant role in this global challenges and, confronting authoritarianism, global authoritarian bloc, but also it can help United States to actually face other sort of challenges like environmental challenges. I believe this expanding this track to diplomacy with Kurdish society, with Kurdish political society, especially in for example, in Iranian part of Kurdistan that still doesn't have an autonomous status there, can be very effective. I'm going to stop there and go back to you, Yousif. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Saleh, for working hard to bring all these numbers and showing us what has taken place in the Iranian Kurdish region. Thank you for that. We'll come back with a couple of questions. Dr. Azad Deewanee will give us a nice presentation about what took place in Syria's Kurdish region or the areas under the autonomous administration of north and east of Syria. Dr. Azad Deewanee, you can unmute and share the screen with us.
Thank you, Yousif. And I'm grateful to Washington Kurdish Institute for organizing this event and for inviting me. And my greetings to other speakers and the audience. Hopefully together we can add to the knowledge on the Kurds, us and the speakers and the audience. It's really difficult to cover all these events in Syria or in the northeast Syria, Rojava, in a matter of minutes, and I have allocated time, but I have prepared some slides. I'm going to show as a PowerPoint slides. As you know, the 21 started with Biden presidency, and that was fortunate for the Kurds in Syria, Christians and Kurds, because Kurds and the population, and including myself, we were quite worried about potential bargain between Trump and Erdogan, as it happened in Serikani, Girsepi, the invasion of 19 in Girsepi, Serikani, where Kurdish and Christian population were forced to go out, and several type of violations happened there and still continue to be a place of threat. Fortunately, another massacre or another invasion didn't happen, as the wise President Biden won the election, and we were happy for this. I have major areas to talk about because I cannot cover everything, but I have just allocated the major areas that I can talk about, which are related to security situation, economy, and living conditions and political status. For the security situation, the SDF and US-led coalition continue to contain ISIL through although ISIL sleeper cell continue to operate and intensify their action in 21, getting advantage from the conditions created by this zone by the 2019 Turkish jihadist invasion, which has been a major security breach and a major step back from what the international coalition against ISIL have achieved. Northeast Syria is continuously under attacks by daily terrorist attacks, you can say, by Turkish military and Turkish commanded jihadist militia, especially from this area, and they occupied in 2019 and also in some areas here. But this is the major concern now for the coalition and the SDF, as the SDF is kind of consuming or allocating a lot of resources and efforts to deal with these attacks daily, and distracting SDF from its main mission in the campaign against ISIL. So to talk about the security issues, we have also to speak about the role of Russia, because Russia is giving the role of guarantor, but unfortunately, Russia is on the border, entrusted to secure the buffer zone between the Kurds or the SDF and the Turkish forces and its militias. But actually, Russia is playing negative role as it's using Turkish military and the existence of Turkish military and militias as a tool of terror against the population, against the Kurds and the Christians of the area. And you can see here, this is a map of December 21 you can see the source also. The attacks are continuing, and Russia is actually using this to force the SDF to abandon the US-led coalition and to make concessions for the Syrian regime. These violations, they have, you can say, weekly mortalities among civilians from different ethnic and religious backgrounds. But they are mainly close to the Kurdish Christian areas, where, especially in Tel Tamar, where you can see here a Christian population, the populated area, they get a type of heavy burden of bombardments from Turkish military and Turkish jihadist militias. Iranian militias and Assad regime, Iranian-backed militias in the areas western in the west of Euphrates Bank, and their sleeper cells are also causing a type of instability and problems for the coalition and SDF. As inside, they both, the regime, the Syrian regime and Iran, inside these sleeper cells to create instability in the region. They also got advantage from this invasion of 19, as the situation changed and the grip on the ground is kind of loosened by the existence or the presence of Russia and the Syrian regime in some places. Why Turkey is antagonistic to Syrian Kurds? This is possibly not related to anyone only, but possibly it's perhaps needed for the audience to know why they think that Turkey is advancing its argument that Syrian Kurds are a security concern for Turkey. But have these people, or especially the policymakers and people who are concerned about the area, studied how many attacks actually Syrian Kurds committed against inside the Turkish, or preemptive attacks that Syrian Kurds planned against Turkey, not type of self-defense against the Turkish attacks. You might not find any attacks like this. But I think the main concern is, there are two ideological reasons for this. One of them is that the Syrian Kurds are adjacent to the Kurdish area or the region, as Kurdistan was divided, the Kurdish area in Turkey. The majority Kurds are here subjugated, and perhaps according to some studies, over 20 million Kurds there are subjugated and deprived from their rights. So if Syrian Kurdish case progressed, this would reflect or encourage Kurds, and as encouraged previously they announced autonomy before. So it's encouraged to Kurds in Turkey, and this is a main concern for Turkey, and it's not security concern, but I can say it's racism concern. The other one is that the AKP and Erdogan have their Islamist agenda of expansion and retrieving the Ottoman legacy. That's why they are now, or since the so-called Arab Spring, they are supporting these Islamist groups and Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, Egypt, Libya, and even in Iraq and some other places. Sorry, the other point is about the economy and living conditions of the population, or the living conditions of IDP and population in the area, northeast Syria, Rojava. Although the region has a type of promising oil and gas reserves, and it has a kind of wide agricultural plains, it has no big investments. And this could be for the embargo and lack of political recognition. The administration and low resources humanitarian organizations struggle to find solutions for the lack of essential food elements and medicine, energy for the IDPs especially. This is because there is a big number of there are a big number of IDPs everywhere, and who fled because of the campaign against ISIL and the Turkish jihadist invasions. There is also a problem, as the other speakers talk about the border crossing. Of course, there is embargo over Syria. It's a big embargo, and it impacted the living conditions of all Syrian population, not only in that area. We have two crossing. We have only one crossing for the public, which is called Semalka. I can show you here. This is sometimes on and off, and it depends on the political rift between the Syrian Kurdish PYD and Iraqi Kurdish KDP. Is not stable to be for investments and type of economic shares. So we have this problem in Rojava, northeast Syria. And we have another problem, which is weaponizing water by Turkey. Turkey actually uses the water resources as a weapon to harm the population, actually. I don't know if you are familiar with the dams that Turkey is building on Euphrates and Tigris rivers, which are international rivers crossing through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, and the way this type of policy harmed the Syrian Iraqi population, including Kurds and Arabs and others. And even Turkey is now Turkey and its militias is depriving the population of cities like Hasake and IDPs there from the water of Syrian water station of Alok, which is well known in Serikani, occupied by Turkey and its militia, occupied since 19. Just yesterday, they attacked a water station called Al-Hisha, and this is far away from the Turkish border. It's close to Ain Isa. Just yesterday, they attacked the water station there. So it's really harsh, difficult for the population with all these limited resources and all these difficulties they face and the embargo. The other point or area I want to shortly cover is the political status. So far, there is no, the Syrian Democratic Council is searching for international recognition for the administration of Northeast Syria. And so far, its efforts were not much successful. And this is the case of its negotiations with the Syrian regime. Although during the last year, there were modest progress in the de facto communication with the autonomous administration and the departments of foreign relations in some Western countries. A relevant point is the recognition of the autonomous administration by the Catalonian parliament. And this was, you can say, a positive point. I have these recommendations to demand the withdrawal of the Turkish and Iranian forces and militia. I can say that Turkish forces and militias, jihadist militias, perpetrated flagrant crimes against humanity, flagrant war crimes. You can describe them as ethnic cleansing acts because they targeted Kurds and religious minorities, especially in Afrin, and against women. The other recommendation to reactivate the security mechanism, which was applied during the Trump administration, and was abandoned by the Trump administration after destroying the fortification and defenses of SDF upon the request of the Trump personnel. Unfortunately, this was a betrayal and a green light to the Turks to invade. So hopefully the Biden administration will think about it wisely to find an effective mechanism for reconstructing the basic services and schools in the liberated areas. What I mean is that the area liberated from ISIL as part of international campaign against ISIL, the lack of such services incite pro-ISIL sentiments in the areas that have ISIL sleeper cells. And another recommendation, which could be difficult, but it's vital for investments and for stability in the region, which is to recognize the autonomous administration, to support recognition for this internationally. And this will also invest or at least to encourage investments in the region to alleviate the living conditions of the population. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Azad. It is, I mean, a bit overwhelming to cover all these different Kurdish regions, but it's definitely very useful to hear, and I appreciate, and I'm sure the audience as well, your recommendations alongside your colleagues. We have a few questions via email and a couple on the screen, but I want to go on anyone else has, if any of our attendees would like to ask in person, please raise your hand on the screen. I will enable your mic. Except there is a 747, please, if you identify yourself, that will be easy to enable your audio. I have a question for Dr. Deniz, which is about the HDP policies. Does she think that the HDP putting the Kurds at the front of the fight against Erdogan for Turkish democracy is wise, or has it been successful? And do you see any changes within the Turkish opposition toward the Kurds? For example, there are recent meetings between HDP, CHP, the DAVA, the new parties established. Do you see any hope, any changes within the Turkish opposition, mainly the CHP? Please.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. The first question, let's start with that one, HDP policies, why they are putting the Kurds at the front to fight against democracy or fight against AKP party. I don't know which time frame you are talking about. I assume around 2007, probably, right? Or after that. So during that time, I mean, as you can remember, there were some issues in Syria, the invasion of ISIS invasion of Syria happened, and Kobani was in kind of like in the midst. And Kurds were really frustrated. AKP, pro-Kurdish party, HDP party, a lot of supporters of HDP party also supports Syrian fighting. So the party kind of went with the flow, I think. It's like it was a time that everybody felt very strong about nationalism, right? Many of the participants mentioned that there was an idea of this Kurdish unity, Kurdish being a Kurdish, right? And there was this momentum. So I think it just went with the flow. Also with the election, they didn't support the presidential candidacy of the Erdogan, HDP party, and then pissed Erdogan off, pretty much. And then things start to get really ugly after that. I mean, as we know that many Kurdish political officials were arrested, including Selahattin Demirtas and others. So later on, things got really bad because the mayors were, Kurdish mayors were, as I mentioned, the official mayors had to leave their job. AKP party appointed other people that are close alliance with their ideas. And these places or these cities are now ruled by a stranger, literally, and doesn't like the population, to be honest, doesn't care about the population as much, and creates more problem, obviously. And then there was a fight between Turkish government and the Kurdish civilians for a while. And if you talk about that, I agree. It wasn't wise, right, to put especially the civilians up front and for their democratic fight. And some people were willing to fight, right? But some people were maybe sporting HDP party and went with the flow too, in that sense. For the second question, it's HDP party and the coalition. As I mentioned, coalition is not about one party, it's multiple parties, which is actually it's a good thing. I know HDP party is the one that is leading the coalition somewhat and have two really good candidates, two mayors. And those mayors actually are supported in generally by those other political parties, including HDP party too. And if you ask me if anything has changed with the opposition or HDP party, I will say not much. It's still, there are so many radicals and so many politicians, Turkish politicians are hates, even though they are very, they claim that they are very liberal and all that, but still they don't like Kurds and they don't want to see the Kurds having a better living or conditions. But I believe some of the principles they are talking about, shared principle, they say, if that was established, it's going to be beneficial for the Kurds too. And if I believe HDP party definitely should be able to negotiate with the coalition party and should be able to, be part of that coalition. I don't want to see a pro-Kurdish party left out and be a single dot. I think it's essential for the Kurdish party to be part of this coalition. So we will be able to have a saying for the future governance in Turkey.
Thank you, Dr. Deniz. Dr. Yerevan, going back to Iraqi Kurdistan, there are almost 19 years of disputes between Erbil and Baghdad, and there are a lot of issues, disputed territories, revenues of oil and gas, Peshmerga budgets, and much more. Do you think the Kurds should trust a new government led by the Sadrats to overcome these issues? And how would that affect if the Kurdish are not united in Baghdad within one voice in regards to a bigger picture, national security of the Kurdistan region and its entity?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Actually, it's not 19 years, Yousif. I think the Kurdish delegation in 1938 would go to Baghdad. And actually, I don't know, ironically, they have exactly the same demand as today the Kurdish leadership is asking Baghdad. It's Kirkuk, is a disputed area that we call. Its budget is the status of the Kurdistan region as well. So these outstanding issues has been with the Kurds, with the history and the foundation of Iran since 1922. It's really not new. And also, I really don't think there will be any kind of resolution with the Sadrists. Let's not forget, the Sadrists, people were instrumental in cutting off the Kurdistan region's, share of the budget since 2024. Not 2024, 2014, but previously their MPs were very unhappy about how the Kurdistan region was exporting oil, not sharing the revenue with Baghdad. So I'm really not hopeful about these so-called Sadrists who claim to be Iraqi nationalists. Iraqi nationalism has always been a serious problem for the Kurdish demands within the framework of Iraq. And of course, you have the fragmentation of the Kurdish political unity in Baghdad. You have multiple centers of powers, even within some parties. You have multiple centers of power, especially when it comes to the PUK. You have the new generation, which got several seats. They have aligned themselves with the Arab parties. You have the KDP, they're more in bed with the Sadr. The PUK really doesn't know what it's going to do and how it's going to approach all of these issues, even though they're closer to the framework coordination, which is Maliki, Hadi Amri, and all of these people. And now, even though in the past the Kurds were, certainly able to exert more influence, the political influence in Baghdad, become kingmakers, but that has dissipated, and that's not longer the case for the Kurds. As you can see now, there are multiple Kurdish candidates for the presidency of Iran. You have Bashur Zebari of the KDP. You have probably Dr. Barham Saleh from the PUK side. You have Hakim Rizgar, and also even the new generation have filled in one of their MPs as a candidate. So all of these, of course, provide opportunity for the anti-Kurdish forces to limit and try to restrain the Kurdish rightful demands in Baghdad. And of course, that will negatively impact the Kurdistan region in general. I believe 2022 will be much, much harder for the Kurdistan region, especially when it comes to the budget, when it comes to the issue of the disputed area territories, Sadrais, and people have a very strong presence in disputed areas, especially in Kirkuk. And if they're nationalists, as they claim, that's a serious problem.
Thank you, Dr. Yerevan. I'm going to enable the mic for, it's an honor to have Alan Makovsky with us, and he would like to ask a question. Mr. Makovsky.
Thank you. It's an honor to see this fascinating panel and hear these stimulating ideas across such a broad range of Kurdistan. My question is really for Deniz, and I do have to apologize because of another meeting, and apparently you went first, Deniz. I missed your presentation. It was the only one I missed, but I'm going to infer from your last answer. Assuming that there were to be what's now an opposition group in power in Turkey, I think my guess is that they would want HDP to support it from the outside rather than to actually be part of the coalition and with cabinet posts, et cetera. Regrettable as that might be, I suspect HDP would live with that. But either way, what do you think the policy of such a government would be regarding Syrian Kurdistan, Rojava, in particular, and just more broadly, if you want to talk about what you think I assume you probably already talked about what their policy would be towards the Kurdish question in Turkey. But if you haven't, I would love to hear that. Otherwise, I'll listen to the tape tonight. Anything you want to take off from that about foreign policy, a likely foreign policy, would be very interesting. Anyway, thank you very much for letting me.
For the question. It's a good question. I didn't cover that part actually, because the coalition still, we don't know if they are going to be empowered or not.
Of course.
And there are still, negotiation is still going on. And what we are seeing, at least when I talk to people, there's a momentum. There's this momentum that people want a change, right? And Erdogan has lost a lot of support, as I mentioned in my presentation. Now the approval ratings are pretty low. So there's a hope for a change. So to go back to your question, what's the policies again? Is going to be for the Kurds in Turkey or other regions? Well, there are, as they mentioned, there's like these shared principles. It's very general, as I talk about it in the presentation. They said, the focus will be justice. Justice has been violated over the years, and media has no voice, literally, and academia and others there. So those are the main focuses. They are going to make some changes to the parliament. They want to go back to the parliamentary system. But I think the things will be eased. That's the hope, at least. And for the Kurdish, especially the mayors were, lost their jobs, or the Kurdish politicians are in jails. I am hoping that, I think they are going to release those individuals, and especially the academics and our media. Those people are all definitely will be released, but because they want to show Europe and United States that things are changing, right? Things are getting in a better way. They want to please Western countries too. And I think the policies against Kurds in Syria and Iraq might be eased too, because there's a lot of problem within in Turkey. So they may just, focus on the problem they are having, issues they are having. They are definitely going to try to fix the economy. So they are spending a lot of money in military in Syria and Iraq. So cutting that budget, that means less fighting, hopefully. So I think there is a hope if they are elected. I think we all have to have a hope at least. And I feel like the future might be more brighter than now, but we have to wait and see probably until 2023. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deniz, and it's an honor to have Mr. Makovsky. We are going to ask Mr. Arash, jumping all the way to the east, about a possible new nuclear deal between the United States, leading the international community, European Union, with Iran. I mean, what are your expectations? What are your concerns? Are you for it? Don't you think this will hopefully it will help the Iranians, including the Kurds, economically? Please.
Thank you so much. So we are getting some conflicting signals from both sides. From part of them, we hear that the speed is not what they expected. And for example, from the United States side, they're not satisfied with the pace of the negotiations. And from the other side, for example, we have seen signals from Iranian side. I mean, we have seen signals from the leadership, that the leader of Iran, Khamenei, saying that it's okay to negotiate and even interact with enemy. It doesn't mean we are they're actually taking over, and it doesn't mean that we are giving up everything. So this signal basically has been interpreted by as the willingness of the Iran to do the deal and to actually conclude the negotiations. But from the other side, as I mentioned, there are signals that the Iranians are not that eager for that. They're not that much serious in giving the required pace to the negotiations. There is this belief that the Iranians are actually giving this conflicting signals to kill time and to be able to reach a point that it will be it won't be possible to go back to the previous situation. So this is the whole situation. But my consideration about these negotiations is not whether they reach a deal or not. It's not a deal per se that matters. It is the way that the United States has been actually sidelined, or the world, if you may, the free world has sidelined all other issues and matters, for the sake of this negotiations that can be proved that they're futile and they don't have any, for example, real results. But the United States has decided to be silent about the violations of human rights. The United States has decided to ignore everything about Iran, and even the administration decided to lower the number. The previous administration talked about, the numbers that Iranians killed, and that the Iranian actually security apparatus killed, and demonstrations across Iran. This administration even went ahead and decreased the number that was the formal estimations of the previous administration. So I believe it is important to not to sideline other issues. I believe it is important to bring up human rights in the negotiations. I believe it is important to actually work with the Iranian society as they are working with the regime to reach a conclusion. So we can see now that Saudi Arabia and other states are somehow involved. Israel is somehow involved. Saudi Arabia is somehow involved. South Korea is somehow involved. I believe it can work also for the Iranian society, involve them, using the tools that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Saleh. Dr. Azad, why do you think the Syrian regime is not mentally still there to grant any rights for the minorities or do any real reforms within their policy toward the non-Ba'athist, let's say? Do you think that's because the Syrian civil war is kind of shaping? Do you think they have the advantage? And, could you tell us anything about that, please?
Actually, the dictatorship or the characteristic of being dictatorship of the Syrian regime is the reason of all this mess in Syria. If the dictatorship or Bashar al-Assad accepted reforms at the beginning when the revolution was peaceful, this wouldn't happen. This mess and massacres and crimes and gangs. Now, they never learn. As it is, the mentality is a mentality of dictatorship. They would learn only when there is an international pressure. This happened during Saddam Hussein. You remember in 1991, when the Kurds and Shia revolted against the Iraqi regime. The Iraqi regime never learned from all the problems or the massacres or the crimes that they committed during the Iranian-Iraqi war and in Kuwait and against Kurds and against Shia even before the uprising. They only learned when the coalition established 1991, I can say protected area. They would say safe zone, but it's actually protected area more than the safe zone. That was the only chance for survival for Kurds and minorities inside the Kurdish region. So here it applies to Syria and other places like Druze or other minorities, Christians. This regime is dictatorship. And the mentality is Ba'athist dictator, kind of built on mentality that the supremacy of Arab ethnicity over the other ethnicities, as it is in Turkey, the Turkish ethnicity over the other ethnicities. So these kind of regimes are very difficult to change without an international pressure, a considerable international pressure, as it was the case of Saddam Hussein.
Thank you, Dr. Azad. I would like to give our guests each a couple minutes of closing remarks. And I would like to start with Mr. Yerevan, but incorporate one question from Colonel Miles Kaggins, we are delighted to have him with us today. Mr. Yerevan, his question is, in the oil-rich Bashur, Iraqi Kurdistan, are there plans to make region prosperous for all people by improving infrastructure, particularly electricity distribution, roads, and healthcare services? And your closing remark, please.
Yeah, sure. That's a very good question. Unfortunately, as much as oil has put the Kurdistan region on the international map and international headlines, it has also undermined the Kurdistan region in the term of social trust in the government because of the widespread of corruption, lack of institutions to help the KRG how to deal with the money that it was receiving from 2007 from the oil revenue. Even though there are lots of investment in the infrastructure of the Kurdistan, of course, most of this money came from the oil sector, but there are also lots of corruption and also lack of transparency in how this money is being distributed and where it is going. So, the KRG has racked up over $15 billion of debt because of oil. It has pre-sale its oil to the oil company. The operation cost of the IOC, the International Oil Company, the Kurdistan region, is outrageously high. So there are lots of issues in the contracts and how they were negotiated in terms of the technicality. The KRG, I think, should review these contracts and try to be more transparent. They should try to implement the 2017 oil and gas law in the Kurdistan regions, which stipulated that several institutions should be established in the Kurdistan region. And the Kurdistan region is most importantly like some sort of a sovereign fund, even though the law in 2007 has indicated that. Just consider, Kyrgyzstan, if the Kurdistan region had followed the law and implemented, and you had a sovereign fund in the Kurdistan region, and if the Kurdistan region has invested the oil money in the stock market around the world, globally, the return had been at least 14% for the next generation, or even for the Kurdistan region that is currently suffering from the economic crisis and financial crisis. So my closing remark is, I would like to focus a little bit or more on the Kurdish-US foreign relationship, especially during the Obama-Biden administration. It is really important for the KRG, especially, to try to institutionalize the Kurdish or the KRG-US foreign policy. And, this diplomatic relation should be institutionalized, because what we saw that during the Trump administration, the KRG had almost unrestricted access to the White House, the State Department, and of course, the fight against ISIS played a very big role in that. But as soon as the Biden administration came, the KRG was, to a very large extent, was frustrated to the lack of institution that helped, to the lack of access to the White House and State Department. That tells us how important it is for relations to be institutionalized between the KRG and the US government. On the other hand, I think it's outrageous that 14 million people in the world do not deserve a desk at the State Department. They should have one. The State Department should have a Kurdish desk to analyze what is really going on in the Kurdish regions in Turkey, in Iran, in Syria, and also in the Kurdistan region as well. I think as long as the Kurdish affair is analyzed and US foreign policy is formulated based on intakes from the Turkish desk, from Iranian desk, and from Iraqi desk and Syrian desk, the US and the Kurdish relationship will be strained and tension will be higher, and also they result in disappointment for the Kurds, that the Kurds calls betrayal, as we saw in 2017, 18, and 19, and also previously. So that's very, very important for the KRG to stress and highlight that point to the US officials and the Biden administration.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We will ensure that every speaker's remarks will be reported on the website. We will keep every guest posted about amazing points that have been made today. I'm going to Mr. Arash for his closing remarks, and then Mr. Azad, and then Dr. Azad, and then Dr. Deniz.
Thank you so much. So I want to say two things for the closing remarks. First, the Iranian Kurdistan or Rojhelat society is a very strong society, a very rich culture. Kurdish nationalism actually originated there, and we have a very strong civil society there, political society there, a very strong civic culture. At the moment, there are activities going on in various aspects, and if we don't hear from Iranian Kurdistan, it doesn't mean that there isn't anything going on there. It doesn't mean that the society is silent. It means that the structural forces in international relations are intentionally sidelining this part. Those forces who do not want to hear from Iranian society and do not want people to hear about the realities of the society at ground, because these realities will basically affect the way that they are implementing their programs. The second part, I want to address the United States foreign policy apparatus. States in Middle East, if you look at them, they are in the worst situation in terms of fragile state index. They are all some sort of, especially, for example, Iran, Iraq, Syria, these states that have Kurds in them, they are essentially failed states. They are not able to reproduce stability in the Middle East. They are not able to reproduce a national identity within their borders. something else is emerging. Community of, national minorities, communities of Kurds, communities of, for example, Baluchs in Iran, communities of, for example, Arabs in Iran or Turks in Iran. So these kind of communities are emerging, and they have strong, cultural identity among themselves. People who belong to these groups are strong in terms of, their relationship with each other, and they, if the policy is in this region is formulated based on this communities, I believe we're going to have a more stable Middle East.
Thank you, Mr. Saleh. Dr. Azad.
Thank you, Yousif. I have additional recommendation to add as my final point. I just recommend that the US and Western law and decision makers have a socio-political look at the Kurds as a population as political movements in the 4 parts of Kurdistan. The long-term repression of the Kurdish nation under the rule of racist and religious dictatorships of Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria made the position of the majority of Kurds positive and admirative regarding the US and Western world. Such a feature of Kurds can be discerned on the ground, and perhaps many American and Western personnel and soldiers have experienced this feature as they mingled with the Kurds since the 90s or during the war on Saddam in 2003 and during the anti-ISIL campaign in Iraq and Syria. Perhaps you might not see this in the other Middle Eastern nations except in Israelis, and hope that such a look would lead to stronger Kurdish American and Kurdish Western relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deewanee, Dr. Azad Deewanee, and Dr. Deniz.
I like to talk about Kurdish unity. Actually, it's I think I've been studying Kurdish unity last 10 years, maybe, I don't know, and I find it very somewhat frustrating, inspiring somehow, because I've seen collaboration here and there, non-collaboration, fighting. And what I see though is like when we are together, when we are united, okay, we can give any kind of recommendations to Western countries and all that, but we have to help ourselves first. We have to be better to each other. We have to treat each other better. And I know as individuals, we get along very well, but I said this again before, and we have to force this organization, whatever organization we are part of, we are supporting, force them to get along, to support one another. If we are united, we are stronger, to be honest. And that's what I think United States is saying, because we were able to unite against ISIS, and ISIS wasn't easy to fight with, and we've won that fight. Now we are coming back to fighting with each other again. And it doesn't help us, I think. It's not meaningful. We are not stronger. And people or countries, Western countries, are not going to take us very seriously. They're going to just say, those groups are fighting one another. How they are going to help me? They still have their own problems. These small problems are still a big issue for them. So we have to think a little bit bigger. And if we are able to do that, I think, that Kurdish country will be established. I think it's not a dream. It's possibility. But, we have to make that. We cannot tell United States or other Western countries or other countries to come and help us to build that for us. I will stop in here.
Thank you. Very powerful conclusion, and we appreciate your remarks, Dr. Deniz. My 2 cents will be, I always say that for the Western interest, including the United States, that there's a saying, I can't live with or without you. And that's the approach that they are having toward Kurds. I can't live without you, because when I need you for national security, you have to be there. And when the Kurds ask for their rights, there will be always issues and siding with the other side. But I'm very grateful for our guests, for our speakers, for this beautiful venue that made us all come here and have this frank and direct discussion. And I hope everyone enjoyed this an hour and a half, which we went way beyond the time, but it was very interesting discussion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to having you in the next discussion. Thank you, Dr. Deniz. Thank you, Arash, Dr. Yerevan, and Dr. Azad. You all have a wonderful day.